Assalamualaikum. May peace be upon everyone here this wonderful evening. Welcome to IAS 2021 finale event, the All About Forum. My name is Daniel, and we will be your MCs for tonight.
For few who are new or unfamiliar, Islam Awareness Series, better known as IAS, is a yearly event held by the NUS Muslim Society. Its aim is to make Islam accessible and welcoming to all. The theme for this year is discovery, and through our events, we hope that participants can embark on their own personal journeys of discovery. So Daniel, what does today's event have to do with discovery?
For those unaware, tonight's event is a forum dedicated to addressing misconceptions about Islam, as well as how to deal with them. But what made us want to organize this event? The IAS committee felt that for those seeking to discover more about Islam, there will be aspects that they might be unfamiliar with. This unfamiliarity with Islam could lead one to have misconceptions regarding Islam. So, for tonight's event, we hope to learn how we could address these misconceptions as well as discover the ways to deal with them. God willing, participants will be able to leave the event with a better understanding of this topic.
I see. Thank you for that, Daniel. Before we begin the speakers segment, let us briefly introduce the speakers who will be gracing this event tonight. Our first speaker is Joram Van Klaveren, a former Christian and former member of the Dutch Parliament. During his time as an activist in the Netherlands, he was vocal with his anti-Islamic views. He authored the book titled Apostate, From Christianity to Islam in Times of Secularization and Terror, where he describes his journey from Christianity to Islam and discusses his struggles during those years. He reverted to Islam in 2018.
Our next speaker is Ustaz Ahmad Helmi Hasbi. Ustaz Ahmad is currently a research analyst at the International School for Political Violence and Terrorism Research at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies. The center seeks to integrate academic theory with practical knowledge, which is essential for a complete and comprehensive understanding of threats from politically motivated groups. Also, Ustaz Ahmad is a counselor and a member of the Religious Rehabilitation Group, which aims to correct the misinterpretations of Islamic concepts and dispel extremist and terrorist ideologies.
Our last speaker is Ustaz Dr. Muhammad Hannan Hassan. He is the Deputy Mufti of Singapore, a position that sets the tone for the Islamic religious leadership fraternity in Singapore and plays a vital role in strengthening social cohesion by fostering the community's integration in the wider multi-religious society. He is also the Vice Dean of the Muiz Academy, which aims to promote a deeper understanding and progressive discourse on Islam and Muslim society in the modern world. He is also the head of the Postgraduate Certificate in Islam in Contemporary Societies, PCICS, which aims to help returning religious graduates readjust and contextualize what they have learned overseas to local and social political contexts.
And with that, let's now welcome our speakers into the Zoom session. Assalamualaikum. Ada Assalamualaikum. Joram, Mr. Hannan, and Mr. Ahmad, are you here?
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullah. Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. I can't see myself with this design in such a way. I can't see my video.
Alright. Hi, Assalamualaikum, Mr. Joram.
Assalamualaikum, Mr. Joram. Sorry, sir, you're muted. Okay. So without further ado, let's have our first speaker for tonight. Mr. Joram, please.
Hi, Mr. Joram, you're muted. Actually, you're muted. Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, sorry. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullah.
First of all, I would like to thank the organization for inviting me. It's a great honor for me to be here as a non-scholar, of course, between great names like Ustaz Hasbi and Ustaz Hassan. And the subject of this event is very important. And I think it will become more important in the coming years. Misconceptions about the Quran and the Hadith are widely spread and are, among others, used by Islamophobic politicians and opinion makers. And I know this, of course, because I was one of them. As some probably know, before I embraced Islam and became a Muslim, I used to be a member of the Dutch parliament, and I was a representative of the far-right anti-Islamic party called the Freedom Party of Geert Wilders. In the sheet, you can see me sitting and have a little chat with him. As a member, I tried to close all mosques. I wanted to shut down all Islamic schools in the Netherlands, and I even tried to ban the Quran. So I opposed Islam in every way possible. And after 8 years, I left Parliament, and I finally had the time to fulfill a long-held desire. And I was wanting to write an anti-Islamic book. And in this book, I wanted to explain why I saw Islam as a threat to Europe, to the West, and actually to the whole wide world. And my hate towards Islam had to do with several aspects, but the most important one was my twisted view when it comes to the message of Islam as given in the Quran and the Hadith. And there are many examples that can be given, but because of time, I'll point out three of those issues that are often used by anti-Islam politicians to spread the message of fear and hate that we hear all the time. And those issues are terrorism, violence against women, and the idea that the rules of the Quran are alien and incompatible with the West. Sharia as a specter, as they say. And before I explain what I personally found in our beautiful Islamic tradition, I wanted to emphasize that I am, as I said in the beginning, I'm not a scholar. So if I accidentally make a mistake or say something that's incorrect, please forgive me, and you could correct me all the time, of course. Well, the first misconception about terrorism is about terrorism and the idea that Islam teaches Muslims to kill all non-Muslims, because that's something that in circles of extreme right and anti-Islamic groups is something that people really believe. And in my book, I mention a few surahs, for example, Surah 8:12, Surah 9:5, and Surah 2, 190 till 194. And these are all verses that often are used by opponents of Islam to show how scary and violent Islam is. And these specific verses do talk about violence, but they are presented in a wrong way. And that's done deliberately or out of ignorance. And incorrect reading, not mentioning the context, or creating a non-existing cut and paste ayat or surah. And this is often the tactic that is used by those people to misrepresent Islam. And thus the message in Surah 8:12, for example, was of course about a conflict, but it's a call directed at the angels. And it's not a command to people or Muslims to commit certain acts. The fact that people can literally read this in the Quran, because the text is very clear about this, but they still think it's a call for violence against non-Muslims, shows how important it is to correct this kind of incorrect and shallow reading and show people the truth, help them understand. And it's not that difficult, but it takes time, patience, and of course also an opportunity to explain this to people. A second surah that is often used to create a misconception is 9:5, and it's the so-called sword verse. And this verse is certainly about a conflict with non-Muslims, but in a defensive way. Besides 9:5, it's important to mention 9:6 as well, because 9:5 is a command to fight, but directly after this command, there's a second command, and that's to protect the person who seeks refuge with the Muslims, so he can hear the message of Islam. And after that, it urges the Muslims even to bring these persons to a safe place without questionings about his or her acceptance of Islam. So even as a non-Muslim, and that was what I was when I was writing my book, I found that very remarkable, especially in those days, that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, tried to minimize hostilities and even commands the Muslims to offer shelter to the enemy. And that's extraordinary, and it shows the special message of Islam. And that is what we need to show and explain to the people when it comes to this verse. My last example on this topic is about Surah 2, 190 till 2, 194. And here it's very important to mention the context in which this surah was revealed. And I used to point to this surah a lot in discussions with Muslims to show them how barbaric and aggressive the first Muslims were. But as I was reading and studying for my book, I found out that this revelation enabled the Muslims to protect the newly formed city-state by defending themselves against those who sought to fight them. So it was in a defensive battle, and it was a battle to survive and to protect the people, the women, the children, of course, the people themselves, the men. And when I saw this, then it made sense. This kind of force wasn't aggressive at all. It was very logical and necessary, because all other people would do the same to protect their own interests, especially when it comes to your life and the people you love. And I mentioned these three specific examples of misconceptions when it comes to the idea that the Quran and the Hadith call for terrorism, because when I saw the contexts of those surahs, when I got more information about those texts and I received an explanation, it changed my views. And all this deception and misrepresentation and delusion is dangerous, because Islamophobes, but also extremist organizations, each on opposite sides of the spectrum, change, edit, or misrepresent texts in the Quran and the Hadith to suit their own worldly needs. Well, the second issue after terrorism that is often used by anti-Islamic politicians to spread, as I said, the message of hate and fear, is the misconception that the Quran and the Hadith teach violence against women. And that's something you hear a lot in the West. And in the West, people often point to statistics about, for example, honor killings, forced marriages, and stuff like that. And in the Netherlands, Muslims are, and that is true, largely overrepresented when it comes to those points. And there are also the arguments that anti-Islamic politicians and opinion makers give when it comes, for example, to certain Islamic countries where women are not allowed to go to school, or they are not allowed to drive cars, stuff like that. And of course, non-Muslims will get the idea when this is the only thing that people hear, that Islam teaches this stuff. And as a politician, I used to bring these things up when I was in a discussion or in a debate with other persons. And I did that over and over again. But the question is it correct? Does Islam really teaches that women are inferior and that violence against them is okay? Well, the answer is, of course, no. And to figure that out, I went to the primary sources. and the Quran and the Hadith, of course. And I was astonished by what I found. And I read in Surah 3, 195, that the deeds of men and women are equal in the eyes of Allah. And I read in Surah 30, 21 that marriage should be based on love and mercy between husband and wife. And in the Hadith from Sahih Muslim 2548b, I found that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said that it are the mothers who deserve our good treatment most. And in the Hadith of Al-Tirmidhi, we read that the following words of the Prophet: the best of you are those who are the best to their wives. And critics will point then, because that's what I did all the time, to 434, a surah in the Quran. And it says that the husbands should strike their wives. But as Amina Asilmi, and she's the former chair of the International Union of Muslim Women, rightly stated, she said, the message of Islam has always been taken as a whole. And we cannot chop and use parts of the Quran and the Hadith selectively. We look at the Quran and the Sunnah and the explanation we get from the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. And amongst others, Al-Tabari said that when it comes to this specific surah, it's about more like a symbolic act. You push someone or you say something in a very strong way. And he also says, well, we have to look at our example. And the final example, of course, is the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. And when it comes to this question, what to do, we look at his sunnah, and then we read the messenger of Allah, and we read it Sahih Muslim, never hit anyone with his hand, neither a woman nor a servant. So it's very clear what we should do and how we should read this text, especially when you are talking to people who don't know Islam. And of course, there are still men who do beat their wives, that is in Muslim countries, but also in the Netherlands, for example, in non-Muslim countries. But it has to do mainly with the personal character of some men. It has to do with tribalism, cultural, patriarchal structures, and not with our beautiful religion, because it's nonsense. It's not there. And this brings me to the last of the 3 points that I wanted to make today when it comes to misconceptions about the Quran and the Hadith, and that's Sharia as a specter. Because in the West, when people say Sharia, a lot of people get scared only by the word. And since time is short, I had a whole story, but I will mention just one point to show how Sharia and Western legislation are much more intertwined than a lot of people think. Because Sharia law is, like I said, is seen in the West as archaic and cruel. And opponents of Islam often say that the rulings that come from the Quran and the Hadith are incompatible with the values of Europe. Little do they know that between 1799 and 1801, the famous French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte, he invaded Egypt. And during his time there, he was so impressed with what he saw in terms of legislation that he ordered his staff to copy the Maliki jurisprudence. And when Napoleon came back to Europe, he developed his famous Code Napoleon, and he forced it upon countries in Europe, almost all countries in Europe. For example, France itself, but Belgium, Luxembourg, and a lot of other countries, and of course my own country, the Netherlands as well. So his system, when it comes to legislation, was when he presented it, was about the preservation of human life, and it was about the preservation of family, and it was about the preservation of property and the preservation of intellect. And those, of course, are 4 fundamentals he took from Sharia law. So surprisingly enough, many countries in Europe have, through the still existing Code Napoleon, who copied it, a Sharia-based legislation system. And of course, it's a little bit different on some topics, but the idea that the rules of the Quran and the Hadith are alien and incompatible to the West is factual nonsense. And this is no secret, but it's not something that some people, media, for example, or organizations want it to be, and want it to be out in the open. And I want to conclude my contribution with a text that reflects this setting and this attitude of willingly not wanting to know. because that's what it is in the West for a big part. And in the Quran, in Surah Al-Hajj, ayat 46, I believe, we read, it's not the eyes that are blind, but the hearts. So let us, as Muslims, inshallah, be able to touch those hearts and change things for the better. And I want to thank you very much, and I hope I'm still in the time. Assalamu alaikum.
Waalaikumsalam. Sorry. So thank you, Mr. Joram, for your sharing. I think one thing that all of us can take away from your sharing is that all of these people who like spread hate towards Islam, they actually like to take the messages out of context, and they don't really seek the proper guidance and to actually understand the context behind all these verses and sayings in the hadith. So like I think that's really quite important for us to take note of. Yep. And also I found the thing interesting that like Napoleon actually took the legislation system out of the Sharia legislation out of Egypt and actually tried to implement it in European countries. So like I feel like that's something I didn't know beforehand. And yeah, it just shows that the Islamic legislation system is just and fair. Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Joram. Okay, so to the audience, if you have questions for Mr. Joram, do submit your questions to our Slido using the QR code or enter code 47764 on slido.com. We will now move on to Ustaz Ahmad, who will share more about misconceptions with social media. Ustaz Ahmad, please.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Yep. Thank you very much for having me here in this wonderful forum. Yep. Let me share my screen for my presentation. Right. Thank you to Brother Shabi for allowing me to be part of this forum, and of course to NUSMS for inviting me here. I'm very honored to be part of this session, and especially in the same panel as Mr. Joram and Ustaz Hannan. And tonight, I am asked, or my task is to, the theme of our forum today is with regards to discovering Islam, discovering our religion Islam. And I am tasked to talk about the role of social media or the misconception that we can get from the social media. So this will be my the overview of my sharing tonight. In the next 15 minutes, I will be presenting to you the following. First, a reflection of what we are today, especially in today's digital age, and in our attempt to discover Islam or truth. Secondly, I will share my observation and the effect or consequences of what we have become. Subsequently, then hopefully I will be able to share some light of what we need to do to move on for a better future. And lastly, a bit of retrospection of what we already possess, especially us here in Singapore. Right. So a little bit of reflection. To start off, I would like to invite all of you, including myself, to look at the life we are in today. Obviously, we are living in a highly globalized era where changes are rapid and constant. Digital flows are soaring, transmitting information, ideas, and innovation around the world can be made easily. The world is more interconnected than ever. This interconnectivity is made possible, of course, and obviously with the existence of internet and social media. We've seen, especially during the COVID situation that we are in right now, and the COVID environment, many aspects of our life escalate quickly and made digital or digitalized. Even our senior citizens or our seniors, they are not spared and need to quickly adapt to the current digitalized world. So in other words, in many parts of the world, the internet, online connectivity, and social media has become part or become our life right now. The internet life we are living is considered as a free marketplace of ideas, which allows people to speak freely, speak openly. The knowledge and information can be accessed easily to all. In other words, the democratization of knowledge, to the point where truths sometimes become blurry. What is real become unclear, and had led to more confusion, more misinformation and misconception. So truth, real, and what is right lose its authority and has become decentralized, which the internet and social media had facilitated and make it possible. So this is our life today. So this is a kind of reflection of what we are today, what we have become. This is what we are, and this is our life today. Right. So the question now is, what may have caused such confusion, misconception, especially when trying to discover Islam or religion, or finding or seeking the truth, particularly on the internet or from the internet? So since the internet has become a free marketplace of ideas, like Mr. Joram mentioned earlier, there are many misconceptions. The truth with regards to the Quran, with regard to the interpretation of Quran, have been misinformed. And especially so when authority to knowledge is decentralized, which makes everyone can have their say online. There are entities who will take advantage of this medium, the internet medium. They are taking advantage of the internet to foster their own agenda, whatever agenda that could be religious, political, ideology, or any sense of belief. Every situation right now, or every vulnerability becomes an opportunity for exploitation by those entities. And to, of course, to market their ideas or certain ideas. For example, during this COVID, during the early days of COVID, we have seen many advisories, right, spread on the internet. Extremist group too, they use the internet for the image on the right side of your slides shows an advisory in Arabic. This advisory is using the Quran and Hadith, but the source of this advisory is actually from extremist group, which is the Al-Qaeda. So in other words, truth become blurry. The entities or unknown entities can use credible sources and appear to be convincing, but sometimes they could be wolf in a sheep's clothing. And it becomes more blurry when we see this kind of narrative being portrayed or being shown in the media. They amplify the notion of hate, the notion of Islamophobia, intolerance, and many more. And our behavior, especially as internet users on the internet, is also continuously monitored and processed through the analysis of data. So this is what we call the internet algorithm, which categorize our choices and personalize our online environment. Social media algorithm or the internet echo chamber allows user to be familiarized only to content that they are interested in, information specific, giving a specific information that they like, or orientation that an individual is inclined to, leading to confirmation of bias. It also helps user to connect to like-minded individuals, including those who are already extreme in their views and belief. So for more insight with regards to how social media works and control you or control our life, I would say I recommend to watch this docu-series, The Social Dilemma, which is available on Netflix. So it tells you how technologies nowadays that we are using every day, it connects us, but it also controls us. So these are some news clippings that shows that how algorithm on the internet or the internet echo chamber can lead someone to unwanted path, or algorithm per se can promote content that probably spark outrage, hate, amplifies biases within the data that we feed them. We as the user, we feed those data to this algorithm and they will produce this kind of content. And it may also lead people to become radicalized. So this is the social media or the internet. Right, so what are the consequences? Right, we have reflect, we understand our situation or what we have become today, the life we are in today. There are consequences that the effect, for every cause there's an effect, right? So the consequences probably can lead people to making irrational choices. We've seen on the media, on the news, individual being detained, investigates, right, due to self-radicalization. One of the major common contributing factor is the internet. So it makes us become a reactive society without thinking, without proper thinking process, especially when the internet we are using, right, have those kind of function available, such as the like, dislike function, comments, and so on. Then we as a user, we are trapped, or when a user is trapped in this specific echo chamber, it could also shape the individual thinking process and solidify their thoughts. If their thoughts are right, alhamdulillah, but if the thoughts is wrong or not in the correct path, so that is the danger. So most of us would like to, whenever we see things on the internet that we are keen, we use this term, jumping on the bandwagon, right? Jumping on the bandwagon culture. So this kind of culture need to be addressed by intellectual process and also thinking process. Right. I will also say, or I believe it is not too much to say that our current situation has been McDonaldized. So when I say McDonaldized, is the McDonaldization of society, a term first coined by a sociologist, George Ritzer, in his book, in his 1993 book. I'm sure most of us, I mean, I was 6 years old when this book was first published. So it refers to the process by which the principle of fast food industries are dominating many sectors of our life or many sectors of society. So to say that the fast food industry like McDonald's requires each production to be efficient, to be fast, like the principle of calculability is which is to say, in other words, the preference of quality over quantity over quality. Or the principle of predictability is when the production can guarantee uniformity and standardized outcome. So these are all principles that a fast food industry needs to have for its production. So to say that, and it is sad to say that our modality when discovering or seeking Islam, seeking the religion, we are used to this kind of principle. We want things fast. We want things instantaneous. We do not look at the quality, right? We only conform to things that are suitable to us. So these are the principles that probably have shaped us. But moving forward, I'm not saying that we should renounce or totally avoid the internet. As I mentioned earlier, we cannot deny that it has become part of our life today. Most importantly, I believe, is how we manage ourselves when we utilize this medium. It is upon us whether we want to control this technology or we let them control us, especially when we talk about finding truth, finding about Islam, learning about Islam or our religion. Hence, we must first and foremost build our resilience in facing today's challenging world, improving our intellectual resilience by reading good books, grab a books, and cultivate resilience in terms of our emotions, right? Avoid being a reactive society. We need to be taught that we cannot achieve or we cannot get everything instantaneously, especially when we talk about seeking knowledge, seeking the religion. We must go through a certain process. But there's a process, and it is not spontaneous and it is not instantaneous. We should also expand our horizon, learn from multiple asatiza, teachers. It is also where we learn from several or many asatiza. It is normal to get confused when acquiring knowledge, because probably different asatiza have different thoughts or different opinions. But at least this kind of confusion, I believe, is guided, and we are under the right guidance of the right people. So, yeah, so we need to embrace diversity and be confident when we are making our choices. So I would like to conclude, having said all that, I would like to conclude my presentation by a little bit of retrospection on what we have, especially in our Singapore context. We are fortunate enough, alhamdulillah, that we have mechanisms in place to guide us. For example, like the Asatiza recognition scheme, where our local religious Muslim clerics are qualified and accredited to walk us through in today's challenging world. This is something that is envied by people of other country. I've spoke to colleagues in Indonesia, whereby the religious discourse is polarized, right? Because there's no regulated mechanism, such as our Asatiza recognition scheme. Our mosque, for example, our Muslim organization are constantly striving to contribute not only to this Muslim community, but also to our multi-religious country. Yeah. So these are some images or photos that I've come up to show that, alhamdulillah, I can say that we are in good hands. We have asatiza, young asatiza, who can guide us through. I mean, for students like you, the fact that our Deputy Mufti is here with us today shows that this religious discourse, even if there's a gap, we try to bridge that gap between the clerics and the community. So our asatiza produce or develop curated localized content suitable to the Singaporean Muslim. And also, I'm showing this photo to show that, alhamdulillah, in Singapore, I can safely say that we have a progressive leadership to guide us through. For example, during the early days of COVID, if I remember correctly, Singapore is the first country to announce closure of mosques, right? Our neighboring country, when we look on the internet, our neighboring country, we receive backlash from citizens from our neighboring country talking about how weak or backlash on this decision. But to me, this shows that we have strong leadership that are confident to guide us through. Our strong leadership to guide us to progressive and to make us a progressive society together. So to conclude, I would say that when we talk about discovering Islam, the internet can be a tool. It is a useful tool, we cannot deny that, but we should not take the internet as the only medium to gain knowledge, to understand Islam. We should widen our perspective, make use of alternative mechanism that we have in place, and also to continue building our resilience, especially intellectual and also emotional. And lastly, as Singaporean Muslim, I would say that we should be proud and confident with our local leadership. So that's the end. I hope I have not taken so much time. That's the end of my presentation. I hope this gives you a bit understanding of the social media, especially into this context whereby we are facing challenges, but inshallah, with the support from the community and strong leadership, I'm confident that we can move together robustly and strongly, inshallah. So thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Ustaz. That was a good sharing from you, especially saying that the internet is a very good, useful tool, everyday tool for our lives. It's also a choice for us to post or share that what we want in the internet. But you also must be aware of what we post online, and also be aware that it's not the only tool to discover about Islam. But it's also important for us to build resilience, to build our awareness, to control our emotions when we see any malicious comments, etc. And we also be proud and confident in our Muslim asatizas or teachers in guiding us to finding the truth or dispelling any misconception that we have. So thank you very much. So for the audience, if you have any questions for Ustaz Ahmad, do submit your questions to our Slido using the QR code or enter the code 47764 on slido.com. We will now move on to Ustaz Dr. Muhammad Hannan Hassan to have his sharing. Ustaz, please. Ustaz, you're muted.
Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I would like to welcome Brother Joram from Denmark. If you see my picture there, let me just, okay, that picture, I'm not sure whether you can recognize that. Is actually in Amsterdam. So I also spent almost close a month many years ago in Leiden University doing my research. So Amsterdam is dear to me. Not that Johan Cruyff is my favorite player, but yes, I love going to the Netherlands and see a lot of people cycling. Singaporeans need to learn this and save the world. Yeah. I also want to thank Brother Ustaz Ahmad Helmi for the presentation. I also note that in the many pictures that he shared of the Asadiza, by Asadiza, Brother Joram, just so that you're familiar with our terms, Asadiza, we mean imam, the imams, the religious clerics, the imams, the teachers. So I note from Ustaz Helmi's presentation, the many pictures of the Asadiza. These are all the young Asadiza, his generation, ignoring the senior ones like myself, like his father or his uncles, which is good actually. So I think probably we can retire and let the young ones take the play this role. And I think what the not so young Asadiza can do is to offer certain wisdom in dealing with realities in human interactions. As Brother Joram aptly ended his talk with the ayah فَإِنَّهَا لَا تَعْمَلُ الْقُلُوبَ فَإِنَّهَا لَا تَعْمَلُ الْأَبْصَارُ وَلَكِنْ تَعْمَلُ الْقُلُوبُ الَّتِي فِي الصُّدُورِ. The thing that is blinded is not really the eye, but it is the heart. It is a matter of heart. So in dealing with religion, with the people, it is not just our intellect and our reason, but the ability to see beyond that. And in our Islamic epistemology, the spiritual aspect, and this comes with experience and wisdom. The young minds may not be able to grasp or comprehend because this comes with experience, this comes with long years throughout this journey. If I can begin with my personal story. In my tender age, when I was still in my very early teens, I left Singapore for Kuwait. I spent close to 12 years in Kuwait. I studied in Kuwait from secondary up to my first degree and managed to spend a couple of years teaching in Kuwait. And Kuwait was, if not home, but was a second home to me. In fact, I spent most of the years in Kuwait rather than here in Singapore. I was a foreigner, and I know what it means to live as a foreign people in a strange country. I empathize our migrant, our guest workers here, and especially living in some parts of the Gulf country. It's either you're Arab or you're Korean. They only know Korean. They call everyone who do not look like an Arab, everyone with the eyes like me as Korean, and we are always. The system works in such a way that you must have what we call wasta, what we call a middle person to get things done. That was the system. But that said, I forged close friendship with many people in Kuwait. So much so I considered Kuwait as my second home. It's not my home, if not my home. And I considered myself as reborn in Kuwait many years ago, decades ago. Until 1990 came. Many of you will not remember 1990. Anyone can guess here? 1990, Kuwait? No? Yes, Brother Joram?
I think you are referring to the Gulf War.
Exactly. They are too young to remember this. Probably 1990. They were not born yet. Are you guys born already in 1990? Probably not yet, right? Yeah. 1990 was the Gulf War. Probably many remember the Desert Storm because of the movies, Hollywood. So we remember the Desert Storm, but not the Gulf War. What happened was Iraq, which is the closest neighbor to Kuwait. And it's not just a matter of neighbor as far as geography is concerned, but the connection between Kuwaitis and Iraqis, they are like families. They are like Singapore and Malaysia. No, it's not just a matter of border, but even the culture, the people, they marry with each other. And it is something that we can never imagine. When I was there, when this news was, when we were asked, and I said, no, this is rubbish. No, it will never happen. We cannot possibly imagine such thing happen. But it did. It happened. The dormitory where I stayed became one of the army barrack or center for the Iraqis. You know, the Iraqis took only a few hours to invade it and to invade and conquer Kuwait, because Kuwait was a very small country, and the army was really small. Okay, to cut short the story, so the invasion happened. Within hours, Kuwait was under the control of Iraq. And then subsequently, we know about the Desert Storm, the world huddled together and freed Kuwait, so to speak, yeah. And about a year or less than a year after that, Alhamdulillah, I managed to go back home safely. And after that, after a year or so, I was recalled to come back to Kuwait. I haven't finished my study. I think, if I remember correctly, I had a term to finish. So yes, I wanted to finish my study. So I returned back to Kuwait and stayed for close to 2 years. And I was offered a lucrative, they made a lucrative offer for me to stay, to continue to teach in Kuwait. But I decided not. Yeah. What's so funny about Kuwait post the invasion? It was a better Kuwait in terms of economy, in terms of the physical setup of Kuwait. It was a better Kuwait, better pay. I got better new houses, because they rebuilt the houses, so it was very comfortable. It was very convenient. But then our life is not about our physical. It's not that physical houses that we live in. It is that human interaction. It is that trust with your neighbors. And that was sorely missing. After what had happened, the invasion of Iraq to Kuwait, when you sit with someone beside you, just don't know whether, hey, this is your friend or someone. The mutual trust was totally lost. You know? People did not trust each other. And that human relationship was simply missing. And it wasn't a place for me to stay anymore. So I decided to leave, and I did. I came back to Singapore in spite of the offers after that. And I know some of my friends who stayed in Kuwait or returned in Kuwait, and until now some of them are still there, and they live quite reasonably well economically and so on. Yeah. The reason I raise this matter is, when we talk about da'wah, when we talk about interfaith dialogue, it's not first and foremost about the intellect and reason. Yeah. Yes, so those 3 points mentioned by Brother Joram, these are very important. But it has to start first at this level of trust, that I can trust, I can listen to you. You are my friend. When I listen to you, I know that this is Brother Joram, this is Ustaz Helmi, this is Hannan, and I know that you're sincere. So it's not just about what is intellectually convincing. It is also a matter of heart. And that's what our Prophet ﷺ was. Rasul did not convince people to convert to Islam through theological discourse and dialogue. Our early Islamic theologies were relatively easy. It's not so complicated. It's not through theology. it is through something else. It is through social relationship. It is through friendship. And Rasulullah wasn't a stranger in the community. Rasulullah was someone well known in the community. Allah SWT said, يَعْرِفُونَهُمْ كَمَا يَعْرِفُونَ أَبْنَاءَهُم. That the Arabs, the Quraysh, know Rasulullah like they know their own children. But Abu Jahl and the rest who fought against Rasulullah, the reason wasn't due to theological differences, wasn't due to friendship or trust, but it is about power. It is about retaining and maintaining my power control over the people. And the unwillingness to surrender, supposedly, this control and authority to this guy named Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So you see, we see that when Rasulullah migrated to Medina, one of the first things that Rasulullah did was again to strengthen that cohesion, that social relationship, that mutual trust, that friendship. And I think that's the da'wah that we need to develop, especially here in Singapore. Yeah. And what causes that hate? The recipe is this: ignorance breeds fear, fear breeds hatred, and unfortunately, when these are translated into violent action, yeah. So because we do not know, we do not. These are there's lack of trust, there's lack of confidence, there's no friendship, and ignorance really breeds fear, and in turn, fear breeds that hatred, because we do not know the rest. And what happened recently, but Joram, if you are unfamiliar, if you are not updated, last Wednesday, the news was revealed where that 16-year-old boy, you've heard about that, right? So yeah, so I don't have to repeat. I'm sure the rest are familiar with this. The youngest detainee so far, yeah, influenced by the far-right extremist views. And unfortunately, this young boy, this teenage boy, has little knowledge about Islam and the Muslims. He doesn't have that friends to talk with. So this is really a matter of ignorance, and much less issue of trust. So what I want to stress here before I end is the need to forge this relationship, the need to develop this mutual trust. And I think, alhamdulillah, Ustaz Helmi did say this. We are fortunate that the relationship between the interfaith relationship here in Singapore is something that we must protect with our heart and soul. That mutual trust. We have invested significantly in developing this emotional bank and what I call the trust reserves. In these reserves, the trust reserves is very high. Similarly to COVID, when our government had to resort to our reserves, because alhamdulillah, we have very strong reserves and we are able to support the citizens from the reserve. And our reserves are not limited to dollars and cents. More importantly is really the social trust, the capital, and that we must. Let me see. Yeah, my timer has reminded me to end. Okay. So that's the thing, and this event, this unfortunate event, is again another opportunity for us to demonstrate this mutual trust, this friendship that we have forged for decades. In my area is really the interfaith relationship in Singapore. I oversee the interfaith relationship. The focus is really on social cohesion, And I see that it's very Islamic. It is very important. In fact, my fear is when I retire later or my generation retires, we want to make sure that this mutual trust among our younger religious leaders will persist, will continue. And because of this trust, we are able to resolve or address these challenging issues. So let me end by just saying, brothers and sisters, the way for others, the way for us to engage, for others to understand us and we to understand them, is to engage in this, to forge this friendship, understand each other, first develop that trust, mutual trust among us, before even going through to the very complex intellectual, theological debate between us. We have to start from there. And this is, if I could humbly say, after more than 5 decades living, it's really that trust. When I sit with this fella, we know the sincerity. So I have many friends in Netherlands, in Europe. I travel quite frequently. Obviously, COVID doesn't allow me to do that anymore. In US, and it is that trust, that care for each other, that really binds our hearts. What blinds Sicily is not the physical eyes, but it is the heart. So let us together forge and develop this, and continue to contribute to this trust reserves, our emotional bank. And the recent incident last Wednesday did not but emphasize the importance of us to continue to engage in this. So immediately after, I have been engaging with the Christian leaders since the hour the news was revealed, until just an hour or two before this. And I'm so encouraged, I'm so inspired, by this mutual trust, inshallah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ustaz Dr. Hannan, for your insightful sharing and sharing your experience in Kuwait, who help us understand that trust is important in eventually to address challenging issues in our society. Thank you for your sharing, Ustaz. If you have questions for Ustaz Dr. Muhammad Hannan Hassan, so the audience, please be reminded to submit your questions to our Slido using the QR code or enter code 47764 on slido.com.
We will now have an intermission for 3 minutes before we have our Q&A segment. Just a reminder, if you have any questions, to post them to our Slido by scanning the QR code or enter the code 47764 on slido.com. All right, see you guys at 9:04. You can take your break now.
Welcome back, everybody. I hope you're feeling fresher after the short break. Let's move on to the Q&A session. For the Q&A, you can ask your question in 2 ways. You can either post the question through Slido or through open mic. If you wish to ask your question through the open mic, please unmute yourself and proceed with asking the question. Be reminded to introduce yourself and specify who you're directing your question to.
All right, let's begin with an open mic question. Would anyone from the audience like to pose a question to the speakers?
Hi, yes. Assalamualaikum to all our speakers here today. First of all, thank you very much for your sharing. My name is Afiq. My question goes out to Mr. Joram actually, but I would extend it to our other 2 speakers here. So, Mr. Joram, I would imagine that such a dramatic change in perspective must have been quite the revelation to you, especially for someone with the level of authority that you had and the kind of values that you firmly held beforehand. So my question is, what would you recommend to everyday non-Muslims out there who are hyper exposed to the media and to global politics, what kind of steps, practical steps could they take in order to clear the misconceptions about Islam?
Well, first of all, thank you for your question. Well, I don't know if there's a big difference between people who are citizens or people who are in politics when it comes to Islamophobia and when it comes to misconceptions and when it comes to the way people act when it comes to Islam. I think, yeah, it's kind of a Corey answer, but the most important thing is, and that's my personal experience, is just to try to live up to the Sunnah, to show people what Islam really is. Because, of course, I know from my own experience that I was misled in a way, and in my personal, we have a very different context, of course, because Europe is so different compared to Singapore, and the way your culture works, the Islam community with you guys is much more developed, and it's much more older in the context of your own country, because in the Netherlands, of course, it doesn't exist that long in the country. Of course, the Netherlands had a colony, Indonesia, but of course it was far away, and it didn't have real interaction with the country of the Netherlands itself. And in the Netherlands itself, Islam is just there around, let's say 50 or 60 years. So it's still very young. And in the Netherlands, of course, there's another thing is that a lot of people really don't know Islam. Because in Singapore, a lot of people have knowledge, of course, not to a high extent, I suppose, but there are a lot of Muslims in your country. So the impact of Islam is much more a reality with you guys than with us. And it's much more, I think, aware that Islam contributes in a positive way to the country as well. And in the Netherlands, that's different. And I think that's different in the whole of Europe as well, because in Europe, we have, of course, a very dark history when it comes to minorities. For example, we have a Holocaust where millions of people were gassed and killed by the Germans, our neighbors. Of course, we had a lot of things done, slavery, stuff like that. That's always aimed to minority groups. And of course, Muslims are a minority group in the Netherlands, are a minority group in Europe as well. So you are, of course, confronted with ideas that people have that are not correct. And I think the most important thing, of course, is knowledge. Show people what it is. Try to inform them about what Islam is. But the most important thing is, like Ustaz Hassan already said, it's your behavior. Because a lot of non-Muslims don't read the Quran. They don't read the Hadith. They read you as a Muslim. They read you as a human being. So if you are a very nice person, you do things that people say, whoa, that's something special. That's something I admire. Then people will instantly admire who you are in an extensive way. So also your religion. But if you do nasty things and you're not a warm person, or you do things in a kind of a negative way, people will have negative feelings about you in an extensive way. So also about your culture and your religion. So I think the most important thing after, besides inform people, try to educate people, is the behavior. And that's in a way, when we look at the history of Islam, and the first people, especially when you look at Indonesia and Malaysia, the first people who converted to Islam, they converted because they had contacts with people who were salesmen, people who got it, and they were they looked at their behavior, and they looked at their beliefs, and that's what inspired those people to, in the end, convert to Islam. And I think that's the best way. But it's my personal view.
Right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Joram. One thing we can take away from that is, like, for him highlighted is that it's important for us to show our Islam rather than like informing people, because like we are after all ambassadors of our own religion, and we are the image of our own religion. So like we have to put on our best behavior and like try to follow the sunnah of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in order to spread a good image of Islam. Thank you.
All right, we will now move on to the Slido questions. So we would like to go through the questions that are posted in Slido. So all right. Okay. Sorry. There's this question to Ustaz Hannan. How does MUIS keep up with the potential of the internet to counter such misconceptions?
Brother Joram, by MUIS, I suppose you know what MUIS is? MUIS is the Islamic Religious Council of Singapore. That's a Malay word, Majlis Ulama Islam Singapore. It is a statutory board here in Singapore, overseeing all matters pertaining to Islam and Muslims in Singapore. So Mufti, Deputy Muftis are staff in MUIS, and as a Deputy Mufti, I'm an officer in MUIS. So how does MUIS keep up with the potential of the internet to counter such misconceptions? I wish we have the solution to this challenge. This is really a long journey, a long battle. But in terms of some of the initiatives, projects, Ustaz Helmi just now showed a picture of young Asadiza, him and some other young Asadiza. These are Asatizas under what we call the Asatiza Youth Network, AYN. Yeah. So they engage with the public through the social media, through internet, providing quality content. They are well trained in terms of the algorithm. How do you get your posting when people Google and search for certain question, and then there are strategies to make sure that yours will be up on the Google the search result. So they have been successful so far, alhamdulillah, but this is a continued battle. So that is one group, to mention a few. The RRG, the Religious Rehabilitation Group, RRG, which is Helmi is also part of that, and I'm also the founding member of the RRG. They're also involved now in the engaging youth in the media, social media. And I think if you notice, the most now social media is the thing. Everybody is going to social media. Honestly, I want to be very honest with you. I don't really enjoy engaging in social media, and I don't really want to be bothered by a lot of postings on social media. But in my official capacity, in the nature of my work, I cannot but be updated. So even if I don't read them, the others will tell me, "Such you got this, blah 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 blah." So that sort of disturbed my night lah. So I want to sleep happily with all this knowledge. But because of the nature of the the current situation, I cannot but also be involved. So in Facebook, IG, and so on. But my children are helping me with this, and some of my colleagues at the office also are helping me with this. So yeah, it's a work in progress. What happened, the news last Wednesday is also another reminder for us to continue with this battle. This is a long drawn battle. We'll have to continue. We do not know what else. And with COVID and whatnot, our reliance on internet becomes even more real. People are resorting to internet instead of meeting physically. The fact that we are meeting like this virtually, we are not meeting physically, that is also an advantage as well as a disadvantage. Yeah. So there are many programs. So we look forward to you guys, young, energetic, creative minds to come forward and propose and probably join Ustaz Helmi through RRG as well as other platforms.
All right, thank you, Ustaz, for those recommendations. For us, who are very tech savvy or who are very inclined to using the internet. So for now, I think there's a question from the audience. Does anyone from the audience would like to ask a question through the open mic? If not, we will proceed to the next question, Slido. So Helmi, often the media portrayal incites hate comments about Islam. How do we actually approach or confront with such comments? Is it necessary to?
Right. Thank you for the question. I will also want to be honest, like Ustaz Hannan, I am not very active on the social media myself. My social media, I'm using my social media is to my social media is for me to get updated, see and observe reactions, because my part of my job as a researcher is to look at the trends. So that is my social media, or the accounts I have on the internet. I personally use it for research purposes. But to answer this question, firstly, with regards to hatred, right? If let's say we do not live in, personally, this is my my own opinion. If let's say we do not live in the digital age, we do not have the internet, hatred are everywhere, right? We will come across such narrative, be it from people of other faith, be it from our own from the enemy, and so on. Even when if we look the seerah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we see those kinds of stories, those kind of notions exist during his days. But how do we deal with them? As mentioned by Mr. Joram, as mentioned by Ustaz Hannan, our Muslim identity should be the driver for us to portray what Islam is, regardless of the tools we use. Now we are talking about social media. Behind our account is ourselves, a Muslim. The Muslim identity should be the driver on how we handle such notion, right? So you ask me personally, I would say that it's not necessary. I mean, I would not engage in those kinds of comments. To me, be it if in our Malay idioms, we have mulut tempayan susah nak tutup, right? It is hard for us to control what people want to say, but we can control ourselves. And those are just tools. So those tools should not control us, should not make us become those tools should not be the thing that maneuver our reactions. So we should be the face that control such notions. So how do we approach them? As mentioned earlier, you asked me personally, we do not need to engage. We just show our best behavior, best characteristic as how Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam would do. And what I want to emphasize is this is an opportunity for us to understand and to bridge the gap that probably exists between them and us. So we should take this as an opportunity that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has presented to us for us to become better Muslim, for us to show the best characteristic as how Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam wants us and has taught us, inshallah.
Members, if I can just quickly add, if you don't mind. I think one, we cannot leave the internet world without alternative views. So all of us have the responsibility to partake and participate, to contribute in somehow. But we need to know we need to know how to do that. So I think with the right knowledge to make sure that when people Google for some information about Islam, and ours will be on top. So we need to understand the algorithm, how the Google search works, and then fight for that space. That's one. Secondly, I think we need to amplify human stories. We need to tell stories, because people are moved by stories, not just simply the arguments. Stories are so powerful. Even you look at the Quran, the main part of Quran is not the legal aspect, which is very, very minor in the Quran, neither the theological aspect, but Quran is replete with stories. And obviously these are not just stories. These are stories that move. These are stories that inspire. So I think we need to have a lot more of such stories, and not to allow that 0.001%, I'm referring to the ISIS, to tell stories about Islam and Muslims. And these stories of human relationship, how people assist. In one of our meetings in Washington many years ago, before Trump came into picture, we talk about developing a reservoir of these human stories. So media, if you're running out of stories, instead of just the highly sensitized or the obviously people like to see people fighting among each other, but we have plenty of these stories we need to amplify. Yeah, and I think we need to do that. Why do we allow this young teenage to occupy our internet, our mind, and not the many other good stories? So if you see my posting, I try as much as possible to share stories instead of just the content. And the idea is to demonstrate, exhibit that Islam is beyond just simply the laws, the faith, but it is about human relation. It's about the human dignity. It's about the sanctity of human life. It is about human dignity. We need to emphasize and amplify this meaning. Yeah.
Thank you, Ustaz Dr. Hannan and Ustaz Ahmad Helmi, for your answers. Yeah, indeed. Thank you for highlighting that the best way to address these hate comments is to show that that relationships and deeds are actually the most important thing to show our Muslim identity, and to prevent all these hate comments and that we are faced with today Muslims. Yeah. Thank you for your answers. Okay, so let's now have the next question, which from our Slido link. This question will be directed to Mr. Joram. Mr. Joram, do you mind sharing your experience with the far right and you being in the Netherlands after you embraced Islam?
So yeah, Joram, can I add to this this question? This is a very good question, and also in light of what has recently been revealed. If uh, if you have 2 minutes to talk to this boy, yeah, who has been influenced by the far-right extremist view, you only have 2 minutes to talk to this boy. What would you want to say? And if you have 2 minutes to talk to the authorities, the people in the authority, the people with power, and so on and so forth, whether the security, the government, whatsoever, in addressing this hate speech, far right, and now after what's happening in US is really scary. So you have 2 minutes to talk to the authorities. What would you want to say? Yeah. So 2 minutes for the boy and 2 minutes for the authorities.
A short time. Thank you. Well, when it comes to authorities, I think it's very important that you look at the context in where you are and what time you are, etc., etc. Because the context, as I just mentioned, the context in Europe and also in the United States. I've been to the United States a couple of times. It's very different than the context in your country, for example, or in Africa or in the Middle East. It's so different all over the world. But because this boy was inspired by far-right myths, I think it's very important for youngsters, especially if they do want to have an opinion, that this opinion makes sense, and that you read and that you study and that you learn. And the most important thing besides that is that you develop empathy. And that's something I want to share with authorities, and that's something I do in the Netherlands as well. It's very important. Also, I don't know your education system, for example, but in the Netherlands there's no course where they teach people empathy. And normally, in a normal, healthy society, and I think most of societies, when it comes to morals, were more healthy decades ago than they are now. It's and also because of social media, and it's also it got blurry, like it was said in the speech before us. It's very important that we teach people how to be how to develop empathy, and
yes.
we learn to see the other person as a person, and that's very important. And I think that's it should be a course in schools as well. And like citizenship, we don't have a course like citizenship on its own. It's starting to develop now, but it used to be a normal part of being a citizen in a country, that you know how to act and how to react when someone says something you don't like or do something that's crazy. How do you respond in the best way? Because of secularization, because I saw one of the questions was about secularization as well, that's in our country, that's a very big problem. I think one of the biggest problems of the last decades, because people lost God, in a sense. They don't know religion anymore. And that's why people who aren't religious, they don't have the feeling that religious people have when it comes, for example, to God or to prophets or to stories that relate to your religion. So it's very hard for people who don't know the feeling of being religious to understand what people feel when they are insulted or when they are being hit by something you say or something you do. So it's very important, I think, for the education systems all over the world, that we try to make sure that seeing the other person, not of your own group, but of the other group, as equal, and not only in when it comes to the law, but also as a person, just someone you can talk to, someone you can eat something with, or do something, whatever. So that's very important. And I think that's something in the Netherlands and in Europe as a whole, but also in the United States. And I don't know how it is in your country, of course, but with us, that's something we need to develop. So that's very important when it comes to the authorities. Try to make sure that something is done in education, because that's the youth and that's the future, of course. And also when it comes to religious education by our own community, Islamic community, we have to make sure that we give people answers if they have questions. Because in the Netherlands, when I know, because some youngsters, Muslim youngsters, send me emails or send me some direct messages on Twitter about several topics they are scared to talk about to imams or to the parents or whatever. And I think that's a problem as well, because I think in our tradition, there are answers for everything, but we have to give them answers. Don't say you cannot ask that, or no, shut up, or that's wrong, no, don't go there. Inform people, just tell them, because when we look at again to the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, he was very open, very explicit on all topics, and he gave answers. He didn't say you cannot ask that. No, of course you can ask that. It's an obligation to gain knowledge. So let us try to be open. And when it comes to the boy, and I think 2 minutes is very short, because maybe I don't know how he developed. But when I look at my own situation, and when it comes to certain views, if he is inspired by extreme right, then I can relate, of course, to some things he said and he believed. But when you look at the core, and when you really look at the history and the things the right wing says, it really is untrue. It's not true. So you can, if I had 2 hours with this guy, I could try to answer all his questions and try to make sure that he sees the light instead of staying in the darkness. And it's in a way we should have feel pity for the guy, because he's 16 years old. He's a child. He's a teenager, and to be carrying around such feelings of hate is not normal. And we should talk to the guy and inform him and show him maybe a little more love than he has had in his life. But it's very important to take people out of darkness into light. And people with such ideas are living in darkness in a way. And my own development was not so much when it comes to interaction with people, but I was a Christian, of course, and I don't know, the guy was a Christian or is a Christian?
No, he's a Protestant.
Yeah, and I was a Protestant as well. Yeah. So in our tradition, and that's not so explicitly said, but in our tradition, all other religions are wrong. And when you look, especially when you look at the great names like Martin Luther and people like that, they were very anti-Islam as well. So it's something that you get not directly, but indirectly in your education and in your culture and in the way you are raised in a way. And that's something that plays a big role, because when I was young, people didn't say it like that. But when I started reading my own tradition, I read about my own tradition saying the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, he is the Antichrist. When we look at the way the Christian, especially the Protestant Christian church, taught about Islam and about Allah, they said, no, he is a moon god. He's not a real God. It has nothing to do with Judaism. It has nothing to do with Christianity. They don't know Jesus, for example. That's something else. But it is nonsense, of course, because we as Muslims know Isa. There are so many things when you look at him as the Messiah. His mother is Mary, the special birth, etc., etc. And all those things we see in Islam and Protestant Christianity as well. But certain groups in Protestant Christianity, they deny that, but it's nonsense. It's ridiculous. And it's very important for people, especially in Protestant environments, to show them what Islam is in an informative way. And of course, like we said many times now, to show them a little love. Mm-hmm. But I think 2 minutes is too short.
Thank you very much. I totally second and I support Mr. Joram's observation about empathy. In fact, on Wednesday night, I was engaging with our young Asadiza and I was stressing the idea of empathy. So, but the point is, there is really a dire need to clarify many of these untrue perceptions in the fight, and they too must have the openness to want to listen. Yeah, thank you very much for that.
Maybe I can add something a little, because I studied comparative religion at the Free University in Amsterdam. So a lot of people ask me, how is it possible that you did an academic study on a university and still end up with the far right? And it's a good question, of course. And of course, I thought about it as well. But the thing is, and I think that's with this young guy as well, the guy who tried to commit a terrorist act. And maybe it goes for everybody, but especially when you are young, the things you learned from your parents, your tradition, your culture, your religion, etc., all the other things and all the things people say outside of your own circle, you filter them, like you have your own Protestant glasses on. So I see everything through those glasses. And it was only when I took off my glasses, my Protestant glasses, so to say, that I could really see Islam. And it's very hard for people to do that, of course, but and this is what I'm going to say now is, of course, from an Islamic perspective. But when I was a Christian, I had my doubts about, for example, the Trinity of God. I couldn't imagine three gods being one God, etc. But that's core belief in Christianity. And also that Jesus Christ had to die for the sins of all men. Because when I looked at the Bible, and especially the Old Testament, so to say, part 1, God forgives who he wants. And that's an explicit text. God forgives who he wants. And then all of the sudden, God couldn't be able to forgive. I couldn't comprehend with that. I thought it was not logical. So I already had little doubts about Christianity. So then I said, well, maybe I have to take off my glasses, my Christian glasses and my Protestant glasses, and try to reread Islam, as they say. And Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad from Cambridge University, he said to me, try to do that, because, and I said, don't be a Christian anymore, but just try to read it without your judgment. And that was very important. And try reading text without judgment from the perspective of that tradition makes you more open to that tradition. You don't have to start believing it or whatever, but it makes you understand the other better. And that's something that especially young people, they don't teach that in school. I didn't learn it, and a lot of people in, for example, United States or other European countries, they don't learn that either. And I think that's very important, and to stress the need for empathy.
And sorry guys if I but don't you think that the same advice applies on the Muslims as they try to understand the rest? The idea of all religions are wrong except mine, and trying to understand, trying to have the empathy and see from their perspective. Eventually you may still disagree, but trying to look from their perspective, their eye. Would you advise, and there's a question in terms of interfaith dialogue and conversion, do you advise the same to the fellow Muslims?
Well, I think the most important thing is, first, before you do that, you learn, of course, about your own tradition. Sure. So you are strong in your tradition. So otherwise you be like a ping pong ball and you go all. So that's not of course, and we believe Islam, of course. We believe the message of the Quran and the Sunnah. So, and I think from my own experiences, Islam is the truth with a capital T. So I think you really start studying several traditions. I know a lot of people, not only Christians, but also Buddhists and other people who end up with Islam because it compels to you. It calls. So, but it's still, of course, it's true what you say. I think there are a lot of Muslims, especially the groups who were mentioned earlier, like Al-Qaeda and other groups. Of course, there are also, I think, youngsters who probably are real Muslims, but they don't have a broader view. So they are trained by older people, bad people, to hate other people. And that's not the message of Islam. So broaden your horizon by trying to know the other tradition. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But of course, and that's from an Islamic perspective, I never changed my religion. As a Muslim, I say that because I think that's the truth. And so first raise your young Muslims as strong, believing Muslims. And that's why it's so important to answer their question, because all people have doubts, and that's normal. And you can doubt, but there are answers. So please give them those answers and make the community as a whole and the ummah a stronger ummah with answers for other traditions as well, because there are a lot of things in Islam that are truly exceptional and are worth sharing with other traditions. But it's important for us, if we want to talk to the other person for real, that we know the other person, of course, as well. So I think it is important to learn a little bit about other traditions as well. Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Joram and Ustaz Hannan also for asking the question. So maybe we can, because we actually have a few questions from our social media, our Instagram. So maybe this question can be directed to Ustaz Ahmad. Okay, so here's the question. People sometimes misunderstand that wearing the hijab or covering up is a form of oppression. How do we explain that it is not, and that it is a form of modesty to cover our aura? Yes.
This is a very hard question because it deals with how you interact with people, right? Firstly, I'm on the opinion that whatever we do, we should take responsibility. We should take responsibility in a sense that we understand where we're coming from. We understand the reason, the textual evidence, for example, when we talk about dalils, we talk about textual evidence in the Quran and Sunnah. Be it your 5 daily prayers, be it your coverage of aura, where adorning the hijab, also on. So that is a responsibility as a Muslim that we should really uphold. And they also need to come with sincerity. So when we do that with sincerity, we do that as what we mentioned always in our prayer, inna salati wa nusuki wa mahyaya wa mamati, for verily my prayer, my acts of deeds, my acts of sacrifice, my living and my death is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I believe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ease your journey in terms of upholding that responsibility, especially if it is an obligation. So with regards to how do we address, how do we explain, with sincerity, I believe it will be easy for us to deal with this kind of notion. First of all, is there a need to explain, right? In a sense where if are we being asked or questioned for doing that responsibility? If yes, then how do we deal with that? How do we address that? And if we firmly believe and strongly believe that it is part of our obligation as Muslim, I'm in the opinion to say that this is part of my identity as a Muslim. I am confident to show that this is my identity as Muslim. This is me as Muslim. It should not be something that you yourself feeling how do I say this, feeling not confident of doing. Yeah. So what I'm trying to say here is, if you do something with sincerity, if you do something understanding that it is part of obligation, we should not be concerned about how people think about us, especially so when we have this strong or firm belief with evidence that can support our actions. So this will be my response to that question, because I understand the way I understand the question is probably because we feel insecure doing that action. We feel insecure performing those kind of those obligations, right? So we should really remove the insecurity by having sincerity towards Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, and that is why also I mentioned this in my sharing in other platforms. In our prayer, it is not an prerequisite to say or to read the dua iftitah, but Imam Shafi'i encouraged us to read dua iftitah. Why? Because that very particular verse that we read, inna salati wa nusuki wa mahyaya wa mamati lillahi rabbil alamin, to emphasize that whatever we do, it is for Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. When it is for Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, Allah Subhanahu wa Taala will ease our journey, insyaAllah, and Allah Subhanahu wa Taala will make things easier for us in facing whatever challenges that we may face.
Thank you, Mr. Ahmad, for summarizing that sharing. I think it's important for us to always know our responsibility as a Muslim, to know like where we are coming from before we.
Could I relate that to one of the question in the Slido, asking how do we filter the contents that we share on the internet?
Sure.
Same. I mean, whatever we do on the internet, whatever things that we post or we share on the internet, we must be responsible of what we post out there. If, let's say, you are unsure, so we should avoid it. But if you truly believe and subsequently you receive comments, you receive backlash, or you receive response or negative response for what you have shared on the internet, take responsibility. Oftentimes we see people do not take responsibility when they put things on the internet. Take responsibility as in, if you really firmly believe in what you are sharing on the internet, take responsibility in addressing the concern that you face or concern that other users probably respond to your posting. So this is what I believe we should do, when we should use the internet responsibly, and we should put things on the internet responsibly. Of course, I mentioned earlier, I'm not the person who probably will engage, but I believe, as I mentioned in my sharing, I believe the internet is a useful tool. The way I see it, I may not directly engage with this kind of comments or negative response, but there are other ways, other alternatives that we can address that notion, the hatred notions indirectly or subtly, right? So yeah, probably like what Ustaz Hannan mentioned earlier, share stories. This is his way of portraying what is best for the internet users, right? Without directly engage to the kind of hatred that is in the internet.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Ahmad. I think it's an important lesson for those who use the internet frequently to be responsible for what you post online. Also, don't react like violently or like doing extreme reactions to something that you find that is uncomfortable for you, but always to seek guidance from others. So I would like to thank you to the speakers for answering the questions and participation from the audience. This concludes the Q&A segment. Before we proceed, would the speakers like to say some final words for the audience?
Before that, I would like to add on also for those who answered questions. Don't worry, with all unanswered questions, we took note of them and will be answered. So please look out for that on our Instagram page as well.
If I can make a request in your concluding remark, possibly by the Joram, and that there was question about contextualization, which is quite important. Why do we contextualize? Because I think that question should be given to Brother Joram instead, and how contextualization is very important in understanding why contextualization is important, and therefore it helps him to understand Islam better, and vice versa. So I thought from his own personal experience. You may want to just briefly address that and probably make your concluding remark.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, when it comes to contextualization, I think it's very important because yeah, as I tried to show in the 10 to 15 minutes in the beginning, when you read certain texts and you don't know in what the context is in why it was revealed, then you don't get the whole picture, because if someone, for example, says you cannot take that glass of water, and you say, okay, I can never touch water, that's of course nonsense, because maybe there are children surrounding here, it's hot water, you don't know anything about the water, you don't know what's happening in around the water, etc., etc. So, and that's a silly example, of course, but when it comes to holy text, especially the Quran and also the Hadith, there's so much to tell. There have been people who have studied for 30, sometimes 40 years just one text to understand it. So when you say, well, I just read it and that's it, that's not how it works. And that's how people get twisted ideas. So it's very important that we learn, especially from the madhabs, from the traditional Islamic teaching. So what is what? And to a little sidestep here, I saw in a news thing about the boy that tried to commit a terrorist attack, the 16-year-old guy in Singapore. I saw that they showed a gun. I don't know if you remember, in the news there was a gun and there were all texts on the gun. For example, the year 732, and there was 1683, and names like Karel Martel, Charles Alemania, they call him in Europe. But those are all persons who fought wars, and those are wars that a lot of people on the right wing say that those were wars between Christians and Muslims. But for example, when you look at the conflicts, then you see that most of the time it wasn't about religion at all. For example, in 1683, and that's to show the context, how important context is. In 1683, there was a battle between the Ottoman Empire, the last caliphate, Turkey, and they fought with Austria. And that Austria was then a big country, and it fought against each other. And they fought in Vienna, the capital of Austria. And the Turkish people, the Ottoman Empire, lost. And a lot of people in Europe say, well, that's the day we stopped Islam from expanding into Europe. But when you look at the groups who were fighting, then you see that, for example, the Protestants from Hungary, and they were part of Austria, they fought against the Austrians with the Ottomans. So it wasn't a battle between Christians and Muslims, but what they did, the Protestant people were not free to practice their religion. They had to be Catholic. Like, for example, you say you have to be a Shia Muslim, you cannot be Sunni. And that's how they felt. They said, well, we don't want to be Shia Christian, we want to be a Sunni. But they said, you are not allowed to. And the Ottoman Empire said, well, we guarantee your freedom of religion when you fight with us. So the Christians from certain countries in Europe fought with the Ottomans. And on the other side, there were people from Poland, Polish Muslims, who fought against the Ottoman Empire because they said, well, we are Poland's first, and we're not people who are part of the Ottoman Empire. So they fought for their country. So you see that there were a lot of people, Muslims fighting with the Christians, Christians fighting with the Muslims. So it was all blurry. So people, especially on the right side, extreme right, like the people who put the ears on the gun, they say, no, it's a war against Muslims and Christians. But it wasn't. It wasn't. It was just about country. I want to have a bigger country. And the other side said, well, we want to have a bigger country as well. And there are a lot of examples in history when it comes to conflicts between
Mr. Joram, I think your signal got cut off. Your stream got cut off.
Yeah. Yeah. So Joram is disconnected, but hopefully he will get back.
Yep.
So,
Okay.
So
I think that's let's thank Mr. Joram for his closing remarks. So thank you speakers for answering the questions and for So I'm sure tonight was a great learning experience for everyone.
To our audience, we hope that the content covered tonight has been helpful in addressing any concerns or doubts you may have about Islam. On that note, do follow our Instagram page for regular updates on our events. We'll be posting pointers from tonight's event, so do keep a lookout.
Also, if you're interested to know more about Islam or the Muslim community, do check out these platforms. First, there is the Muslim
Can you
Convert
respect-
Association. So let me just continue with sharing this. Okay. There is the Muslim Convert Association of Singapore, or Darul Arqam, that provides a platform for both converts and non-Muslims who intend to learn more about Islam.
Okay, second is the Asatiza Youth Network, which is a group of Singapore millennial Muslim religious teachers that aims to engage the Muslim community in fostering productive and meaningful conversations around complex issues and make a positive impact on the lives of Muslim millennials.
Last is My Safe Space, which is an online platform that allows users to book either an online or offline schedule with a therapist to voice out their concerns and sensitive issues in their personal lives.
The IS committee values your feedback, so do check out our post. The IS committee values your feedback, so do check out our post-event feedback form and share your thoughts about tonight's event. Inshallah, the feedback will allow us to plan for future IS events.
Can I ask you to allow Mr. Joram, unfortunately he got disconnected, and then allow him about 1 minute to just finish it off and conclude, as so
Okay,
unfortunately
sorry.
that he was disconnected. Yeah.
Yeah.
Please go ahead, Mr. Joram.
Yeah, sorry, my somehow I got disconnected indeed. No, just I keep it short because maybe it was too long. It's very important to see the real context before you form yourself a judgment, because most of the time people, especially when it comes to the Quran and when it comes to Hadith, people just they cut and paste. They take a little part of something and they say, well, that's it, and they stop thinking about it, and they say, well, I can read it here. And that's not, you need some tools to understand the Quran especially, and you need some tools to understand Hadith as well. And most of the people don't have those tools. I don't have those tools. Most of the people don't have those, but we are happy enough to have scholars, and those scholars studied to explain the texts to us. So I think it's very important that we follow the people of knowledge as well. And that's my conclusion.
Thank you, Mr. Joram, for your nice concluding statements. Yeah. So once again, I apologize because due to the slight inconvenience just now and the interruption due to your stream being disconnected. Yeah. So now, before the speakers take their leave, we're gonna take a screenshot for our Instagram. So our
everyone, it's pleasure engaging you, and this is a journey. It is a long journey, and it's not just journey of the mind, but also the journey of the heart. I hope to be able to see everyone again in spite of the challenging times. And I want to record my appreciation to Brother Joram. Thank you very much for enlightening us. Nice listening to you, and it is also timely to have you among us. And as we speak about far right and the influence of these extreme views, so probably we will catch up with you in the future, inshallah. And thank you very much, everyone. Let's keep in touch. I know that there are many questions addressed to me also, but unfortunately, I'm unable to address that. Many of the questions, if you see the PCICS and my background, we spent one whole year really talking with our Sadiza on issue of contextualization, reading text, and so on and so forth. So I cannot possibly respond to your question in 1 or 2 minutes. Let's keep in touch and have a future engagement, inshallah. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum.
Once again, thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Once again, thank you, Mr. Joram, Ustaz Ahmad, and Ustaz Dr. Hannan for gracing this event. We are greatly honored to have you here. So, barakallahu fiqh for your sharing and your time. Yeah. You may take your leave. Assalamu alaikum.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you very much.
Once again, thank you all for coming for tonight's event. Do fill up the feedback form, as we love to hear your insights and thoughts about the event. With that, we've come to an end of the forum as well as IS 2021. Thank you for your support and good night. Assalamualaikum.